Welcome to Healing Childhood Trauma, the podcast for millennial women who are ready to heal from the past. Here, we have the deeper discussions on emotional well-being and practical tips that will empower you to transform your relationships and underlying anxiety from insecure to secure attachment. I'm Lysandra, your host and psychotherapist. I'm a little bit obsessed with human development, deep conversations, and finding the lesson even in the most challenging of circumstances. I'm very happy to have you with me on this journey of self-discovery where we unpack the past and heal in the present. Hello, my lovely. I hope you are doing well. What I really wanted to focus on today is just recognizing the theme of a lot of the client work that I've been doing recently. So probably for the month of December has been around navigating Christmas, difficult family dynamics, and especially going back maybe to families of origin or just being around family when a lot of family history and dynamics is coming up, and trying to recognize that and staying within your adult self when you have experienced a lot of difficult or challenging experiences with your family as you've been growing up. Going back into those same family dynamics can bring up a lot of almost childlike behaviors and going back into previous patterns, previous roles within the family system. And so it makes me think of an episode that I recorded previously on boundaries for Christmas. It was literally the episode from this time last year. And because the podcast has now been on for about a year now, I thought it would be a good time to throw in a throwback episode that I think is really appropriate and still very relevant to what is going on with a lot of the client work and the client sessions that I'm doing. So the episode that I'm going to play to you today is Boundaries for Christmas, which is very timely right now. So I do hope you enjoy this episode and I look forward to connecting with you again soon. In the lead up to Christmas, there has been a theme with a lot of the clients that I'm seeing at the moment, especially people who have experienced childhood trauma and having to deal with the Christmas period and thinking about what that's going to look like celebrating Christmas with family when relationships have been so difficult. If you've experienced trauma within your family of origin and there's a lot of painful memories associated with being around them and a lot of dysfunction within the family system that is still continuing and hasn't been resolved or addressed or even dealt with, it can be really challenging to then go back into that space of whether it's your childhood home or whether it's just being around your family and you've almost had this certain role within the family system, and it feels like instead of going back home as your adult self, you go back home as your child self, and maybe a part of you who still feels like that younger version of you based off of the traumatic things that you might have experienced in your family, whether it's emotional abuse, emotional neglect, or just not having your needs met. And so that's why I wanted to create this episode on being able to set boundaries with your family at Christmas time, because that is the time that you need it the most. And if you have grown up within a dysfunctional family, you're pretty much guaranteed to have not experienced a good model of what healthy boundaries actually are. Without these boundaries, it's meant that so many different toxic behaviors have just been unchecked and unacknowledged. So how do you then preserve your peace and your mental health during Christmas if you have grown up within a dysfunctional family? A good place to start would be by defining what I'm actually talking about when I refer to dysfunctional family. But when I'm talking about dysfunctional family, this usually looks like having very unhealthy beliefs and patterns within the family structure. So the kind of roles that people play within the family being quite unhelpful and being, having quite toxic behaviors. Things like narcissistic behaviors, thinking, that the world revolves around them and their needs. In particular, I'm thinking of maybe like the parent dynamic where the parent almost doesn't understand that as a child, even though you might be an adult child, that you are an individual person with your own thoughts, beliefs, values. They kind of see you almost as an extension of themselves, as opposed to you being your own person with your own values and with your own needs. They only kind of put their own needs above everybody else and then almost guilt trip you into doing whatever it is that they want to do. Maybe there's a family member who has misogynistic views, for example. Maybe they are somebody who is, heavily influenced by religion, but in a way that is very restrictive and controlling, and has some kind of beliefs that you've been able to identify doesn't actually serve you or anybody else in the family. It's just a way of kind of maintaining control in a very unhealthy way. And so maybe you're aware of there being very toxic behaviors within the family. And I don't like to refer to people themselves as being toxic. I prefer to have the term that people's behaviors are toxic as opposed to the people themselves. Because even the most narcissistic person who is very, self-obsessed and has, that sense of self-importance, even they can be quite nice at different times. They tend to be, quite fun and nice to be around. They can be personable. Just because somebody has narcissistic traits, it doesn't make them narcissistic and self-centered or emotionally abusive all of the time. And that sometimes can be the thing that makes it quite difficult to know, like, is somebody being nice, or, what do I expect from this person? Do I expect the nice charismatic side, or should I be expecting the backhanded comments and the things that are intended to put me down and make me feel really crap about myself? And so sometimes those are the situations and sometimes the experiences that let us know that the family is dysfunctional. And maybe you didn't even need this this explanation. Maybe you're already like, yeah, my family's dysfunctional. I already know it. I've identified it from a mile off, and I've been working on myself to try and break those patterns. And if that is you, well then, part of the work is already done, because you've already acknowledged that things are not exactly as you would want to do things. You're already starting to break away from the dysfunction that perhaps you've grown up with, and you're already trying to break those patterns. So if you have been dreading going back to your family or spending time with family at Christmas when you've experienced childhood trauma, I just kind of want to normalize that for you and just validate that it's really normal for you to feel that way, especially if you've had Christmases before where it's been a complete nightmare. Arguments have broken out, fights have broken out, you've come away feeling emotionally and physically drained. Maybe every year you kind of tell yourself, I'm never doing this again. Or maybe you just need to have a better plan going forward. And so that's what I'm going to be covering today. I'm going to give you a few tips that you can use. And so this is specifically for if you are aware that you've got a dysfunctional family situation going, but you also want to be with them on Christmas for one reason or another. Maybe it's because, it's hard to just cut off family and ostracize yourself and take yourself out of the family unit. Maybe it's not the entire family. Maybe it's one member of the family or a few people within the family. And maybe you'll really miss out on memories and happy times with certain family members, which is why you kind of keep putting yourself back out there and back into the difficulty of the family dynamics, because essentially that's all you know. And if you take yourself out of that, then you'll be losing out in a lot of other ways. And so if that is you and you just want a better way to be able to manage so that you can enjoy having Christmas with your family and spending time with your family and not come away feeling like your mental health is on the floor, then these tips are going to help you for sure. These tips are more of a guide as opposed to these are the things that you have to do. Take what works for you and leave whatever doesn't. Maybe it also sparks something in you for you to think about planning in a way that aligns with what feels right for you. So these are some suggestions and things that you can consider, and it might help to give you some ideas of the things that you can do moving forward. One mistake that you could be making is that you are not preparing before you go to spend time with family, and you don't have a plan, you don't have an exit strategy, you don't have an idea of what you will do if things do kick off, you don't have a plan of action essentially. And how does the saying go? If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Is that it? I think I got it. It's a bit of a tongue twister for me. But yeah, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Consider what your boundaries are for the actual day and how you do this. Well, firstly, if you've grown up in a dysfunctional family system, it's very likely that boundaries were not respected, or boundaries just weren't a thing. You don't know how to set boundaries. You don't know how boundaries look in family. People don't really pay attention to boundaries, and they're almost averse to boundaries. You could also find that maybe the boundaries are so restrictive and so rigid that it's almost like boundaries overkill. They're overdoing the boundaries, so much so that, again, it feels controlling and it feels restrictive. And of course, that balance isn't good either. If that has been your experience within your family, they're going to find boundaries really hard. This is more of like an internal process for you to understand the certain things that you will and what you won't accept, as opposed to trying to change somebody else's behavior. Because if you're trying to set a boundary with someone and then you're almost saying, you can't do this or you can't say that because that's my boundary, again, that's you being quite rigid and you being controlling, because you're essentially telling someone what it is they can and can't do. And do people like that? No. Nobody likes to feel like they are being told what to do. So when you go in thinking about what your boundaries might be on the day or with your family, it's more of a thinking about, this is what I am okay with dealing with or talking about, and this is what I'm not okay with. And you might be able to base this off of your previous experiences and knowing maybe what some trigger situations are, some trigger conversations that you know that if certain things are spoken about, things are going to pop off. And maybe it's certain issues around, I don't know, like parenting or politics, money, those tend to be like the big conversations that kind of cause conflict. So maybe you kind of steer away from the conflict areas and know what those triggers could potentially be, the things that you're not prepared to talk about, because you just kind of know what the outcome will be. And so the point of you having this idea of what your boundaries are going to be for the day is so that you can essentially just manage yourself. You can manage what your load is, your emotional load, what you're willing to participate in, and again, what you're not willing to participate in. And it could also be about protecting your peace and knowing that you don't have to show up to every argument that's happening. Like, just because somebody's trying to prove their point and you might know and have receipts for why they are wrong, but sometimes, maybe your peace is more valuable than being right. And so maybe you kind of let go of the things that won't get you anywhere. So you focus on the things that you can control. And the things that you can control is yourself. You can control what you speak about. You can control how you participate in conversations. You can control your reactions, believe it or not. So once you're coming from that place of having an awareness of how you want to be and how you want to show up in that situation and what you're prepared to do, that gives you a better idea of how you're going to actually manage conflict if it comes up, or how you're going to deal with backhanded comments or certain behaviors and things that make you feel uncomfortable. And so previously with a client, what I have done is that I've actually gotten them to write down what their hard no's are. So what are the things that you absolutely will not accept? What is your hard no of, this is where I draw the line. This is an absolute boundary for me. This is not something I can or will tolerate. And that will look like something different for everyone. That has to be very personal to you. It might be around how you're spoken to. It might be based around the kind of language that's used. It might even be around the kind of conversations that you have. But if you spend some time thinking about it and you write those down, that will give you a lot more clarity going into the situation of how to recognize when some of those things start to come up. And it will just help you to be more prepared. After you've written down your no's, essentially those are your boundaries, right? Those are the boundaries of what you're not willing to accept. So you've already got that idea before going in. Now, if you are a people pleaser, you are going to find it really hard to put that into practice and knowing what to say. So a suggestion would be, maybe you practice just a few, like maybe generic kind of statements of what setting a boundary would look like if something comes up that's based on one of your hard no's. And then often the part about boundaries that people tend to miss is the consequence. So say you have set that boundary and you have tried to change the subject about food. Maybe you have said that you don't want to talk about that, or you don't find that comment appropriate, or, you just try and veer the conversation somewhere else, and then they still keep going on and they still keep repeating it, no matter how much you kind of voice that it's unacceptable or that you're not willing to engage. Then you kind of have to think, well, what is the next step you're willing to take? What is the consequence of them doing that? Is it that you get up and you leave the table, for example? Is it that you stop engaging with them? Is it that you turn and you speak to somebody else? Or is it something a bit more drastic, as in you pack up your shit and you leave, right? You have to know what are you willing to do in order for your boundary to be respected and to be heard. The consequence part is the really important part of making sure that people understand that you're not just talking and you're not just saying things for the sake of saying them, and they get to do and behave in whichever way that they want without thinking there's any repercussions or any consequences to doing that. And then self-care is also a really important thing to consider. Self-care is the way that you take care of yourself before going in to the stressful situation, so that you're almost going in already being nourished. You're already going in feeling well resourced. You're going in feeling rested. You've already taken care of your physical and emotional needs before you get there. Because if you go into a very stressful situation and you've not had much sleep, you've been super busy, you haven't taken care of any of your physical needs, you haven't looked after yourself in any way, that means that your level of patience is going to be much lower. Your level of irritability is going to be much higher. You could end up being more sensitive to things than what you normally would, because you're already running on empty. So before you go into a stressful situation, you have to look after yourself so that you have the resources and you have the energy to be able to deal with whatever the situation is. And that's essentially you building up your resilience before you go into a stressful situation. So before you go, be rested and do something nice for yourself. Spend time in connection with, whether it's you or whether it's with others. Maybe it's with, spending time with your chosen family, because we can't control the family that we are born into, but maybe you have people around you who you've chosen as the people that you want to be in connection with, the people where you feel like it's home, where it's safety, where it's love, and where it doesn't feel so hard to be in relationship with them. So you spend time with those people who are nurturing and who are soothing for your nervous system before you go essentially into the lion's den, right? So you're kind of going in feeling as good about yourself and as good about the situation as you can. And maybe if you don't have those kind of relationships and bonds around you, then it's okay. I just kind of want to acknowledge that not everybody has, what you would term as like a tribe or like a community. Unfortunately, everybody doesn't have that. And if that is you, how can you start to just give that to yourself? How can you have a better relationship with yourself? How can you look after you? Are there any interests you have? Are you into anything that helps you to feel more grounded, that helps you to feel more of your authentic self? Do you have that? Do you have a pet? Do you have plants? Like whatever the thing is that helps you to feel in connection, go to that. That is your way of soothing your nervous system before you go in. Know what it is that you are going for. So for example, put a time frame. Make alternative plans so that, if you are going for, say it's Christmas dinner, maybe you arrange to have, dessert somewhere else, for example, or you go somewhere else to have Christmas drinks. You go to visit another family member, or you go to arrange to see a friend, so that you almost limit the amount of time that you have to spend there. And maybe you're going as a family. Maybe it's not just you going into your family. Maybe you have your own family and then you're going to spend time with your family of origin. And if that is the case, maybe the person you're with, maybe whether it's your partner, your spouse, if there's somebody else with you, maybe you talk to them about what your plan is as well. Maybe you have like a code word or a signal for when it's time to leave or when you just need a bit of rescuing. And then thinking about how are you going to deal with it when it feels overwhelming when you're there. So what is your coping strategy for when you're there? And it's not as extreme as leaving, but what is it that you need to do in order to, again, ground yourself while you're in that situation? Maybe you need to have a moment to step outside, get some fresh air. Maybe you go and hang with the kids in the family instead. It could be just getting in the kitchen and making yourself busy and helping out. What is your go-to? What is your anchor for you being able to take some time out and for you to ground yourself and to feel calmer and to not get caught up in the family dynamics that is so easy to get drawn into, especially when these dynamics have been going on for years and years. You having this strategy is not having the idea of you being able to change everything about your family over, one Christmas dinner or, one Christmas period of a few days. You can't really unpack and resolve all family trauma and, change family members and change people who really have no desire or wish to change. But it's just learning how do you cope better so that you can be in their presence and you can still try to keep those family relationships as much as you can with the limitations that come from being in relationship with people who might be emotionally immature and have a lot of toxic behaviors. Because as I said before, you cannot control what other people do, but you can control what you do. You can control how you deal with things. And so that's the part that you can change. You can change how you respond to things, and you can change how you show up and how you react to things. And that's the part where you have your power. That's the part where you get to take accountability and you get to be more of what you want to be as opposed to being drawn into unhelpful toxic patterns. As this podcast is still very much in its infancy, it would mean a lot to me if you would leave a review and also rate the podcast if you like what you hear. Subscribe so you get the notification when there's new episodes that are dropping, and I will very much appreciate that. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Talk to you soon. Thank you for joining this episode of Healing Childhood Trauma. I hope you found today's discussion insightful and empowering. Remember, healing is a journey and you are not alone on this path. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favourite podcast platform. And you can share this episode with a friend. Your feedback helps this podcast to reach more women who are ready to heal and build secure, healthy relationships and heal from the past.